What do you mean? She signed everything over to Sinclair? I blinked hard, certain I'd misheard. But the silence that followed told me I hadn't. My mother's estate attorney, Mr. Delaney, didn't flinch. He simply slid the ivory folder across the glass-topped conference table, as though he were handing me a dinner menu and not the unraveling of my entire life. The edges of the folder caught the light, gleaming like the sharp blade of betrayal. I didn't open it. I couldn't. My fingertips barely touched the edge as I stared down at the elegant cursive embossed in gold on the cover. Mercer Family Holdings. That can't be right, I said, my voice thin, brittle. She told me I'd be the executor. That she was putting everything in a trust. For me. She said those exact words, Mr. Delaney. If you win. Always. He adjusted his cufflinks and let out a soft sigh, the kind people make when they've seen this kind of devastation before. Your mother changed the structure of her estate 3 weeks ago. Everything, her waterfront home in Coral Gables, the art collection, the investments, the yacht, it's all been transferred to Sinclair Beaumont. Sinclair Beaumont. Even hearing his name made my jaw clench. I stood up too fast, nearly knocking over the leather chair. She gave everything to her friend? To that smug silk shirt leech she met at some foundation gala. Mr. Delaney didn't answer. He just folded his hands neatly on the table and looked at me with faint pity. The kind you reserve for people who never saw it coming. The conference room was too quiet. Outside, I could hear the dull thrum of the marina, the lazy clink of sailboats shifting in their slips. My mother's yacht, the one she named Blue Maribel after herself, was moored just across the pier, its silver hull slicing the water like a ghost. And suddenly I couldn't breathe. I backed away from the table. The air in the room felt like wet velvet against my skin, heavy, suffocating. My name is Bronwyn Mercer, but everyone calls me Wyn. I'm 34 years old. An art director. Miami-born. A woman who grew up in a house where reputation was currency and appearances were gospel. I've spent the last 10 years building something that mattered. My career, my independence, my life. And through all of it I took care of my mother. Not just birthday cards and flowers. I'm talking about real things. The late-night ER trips when her migraines got unbearable. Helping her settle debts after my father passed. Flying back from LA mid-campaign pitch because she was feeling off and didn't want to be alone. And this is how she repaid me? By handing everything to a man with linen pants and a British accent? I stumbled out into the sunlight like someone hit me. The heat pressed down immediately, Florida's signature slap of humidity and indifference. The marina glistened under a cloudless sky. Everything looked so normal. That's what killed me. Everything looked fine, while my life had just been sliced in two. I made it halfway down the dock before I saw him. Of course. Sinclair Beaumont. Leaning casually on the railing of the Blue Maribel, one hand wrapped around a chilled glass of white wine, the other tucking a silk pocket square into his blazer like he was posing for a lifestyle magazine cover. He saw me and smiled. Not a warm smile. Not a surprised smile. No, this was the smug grin of a man who expected to see me unravel. Wyn, he called out in that smooth, buttery tone that always made my skin crawl. You're early. Want to come aboard? I froze. My heels clicked against the teak planks beneath me as my hands curled into fists. The yacht that was supposed to be mine. The legacy my father had left, the one I had cared for, maintained, restored. I even designed the interiors myself during my senior year at RISD. It was our boat. Ours. And now he was offering me a drink on it like I was some uninvited guest crashing a party I'd forgotten I threw. Come aboard, he repeated, lifting his glass. I almost laughed. But it wasn't funny. It was humiliating. I turned on my heel and walked straight back to my car, ignoring the rising sting behind my eyes. I wouldn't let him see me break. But I did break. That night, I sat on my bedroom floor with a glass of whiskey in one hand and the folder in the other. I read every word. Every signature. Every timestamp. It was all legal. Tight. Watertight even. Sinclair Beaumont had full control of everything my mother owned. Everything she had promised would one day be mine. Everything I had earned. And for the life of me I couldn't understand why. She hadn't called. Hadn't warned me. Hadn't even hinted that something was wrong. And then I remembered something Sinclair had said at brunch 2 months earlier. One of the rare family get-togethers I'd attended. He'd leaned over the table and said to my mother, half joking, "You need to think about protecting your assets. especially from people who think they're entitled to them. I hadn't thought much of it then. But now. It made my blood go cold. This wasn't some simple oversight. This wasn't bad paperwork or a clerical error. This was warfare. And Sinclair had already made the first move. So I poured myself another drink. And I started planning my next one. I didn't sleep that night. I tried. I really did. I curled under my linen sheets, turned on the sound machine, and stared at the ceiling fans spinning slow, deliberate circles like the thoughts in my head. But every time I closed my eyes I saw him. Sinclair. Smiling like a man who'd just pocketed a kingdom. And worse, I saw my mother. Standing beside him. Smiling too. That smile, it used to belong to me. When I was little, my mom would say I was her mirror. She loved that I had her cheekbones, her sharp chin, the same unruly waves of hair. I was the daughter she took everywhere. Luncheons, charity galas, gallery openings. She dressed me in velvet and pearls and told her friends I was the one who got the brains. But over the years something shifted. Somewhere between my first college internship and my last failed birthday phone call, the light in her eyes when she looked at me had dimmed. It wasn't sudden. It was slow. Subtle. The kind of fading you only notice when it's too late. She didn't say she was disappointed in me. But she stopped asking about my projects. She stopped introducing me as my daughter the designer, and started saying, "Wynn's still doing those artsy things in Miami." Meanwhile, Sinclair Beaumont showed up like a character in a bad dream, effortlessly polished, always 3 compliments too many, and never without a story about some obscure vineyard or political donor he knew personally. My mother ate it up. He adored his stories. His charm. The way he made her feel young again. He called her Bella, the name my father used before he died. He brought her fresh-cut lilies every Tuesday. He installed a piano in her living room even though she hadn't played since 1983. Me. I became background noise. When I'd call, she'd put me on speaker while she cooked, half listening. When I visited, she asked if I could not wear black again because it made me look severe. I noticed the way she lit up when Sinclair entered the room, and how she softened when he poured her a glass of wine before she asked. And I hated that it hurt. Because I'm not supposed to care. I'm a grown woman. Independent. Accomplished. I live in a skyline apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and custom art on every wall. My name is on a short list of Miami creatives under 40. I have friends, I have purpose. But in that quiet space between midnight and morning I felt 12 years old again. Wondering what I did wrong. I pulled out my phone and opened my last text thread with her. 3 bubbles. The last one was from me 2 weeks ago. "Hey, thinking of swinging by this weekend if you're around. Want to grab dinner?" No reply. Before that. "Happy birthday, Mom. Sent a little something to the house. Hope you love it." Nothing. I stared at the screen until the blue light blurred my vision. Then I opened Instagram. Of course Sinclair had posted. There it was. A soft filtered photo of my mother on the yacht, laughing, wind in her hair, a mimosa in hand. Caption. "Some people age. Others become icons. Celebrating you always, Bella." SB. Over 100 comments. Most from her friends. Some from people I didn't recognize. But not one mention of me. Not even a tag. I closed the app. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I allowed myself to be angry. Not the performative eye-rolling kind. Not the sarcastic humor I used to deflect uncomfortable feelings. No, this was deeper. Quieter. Like coals under a fire grate, waiting. How had I been erased so easily? And why had my mother let it happen? I thought about the hours I'd spent researching nursing care options last year when she complained about her sciatica. The custom-designed living room I'd created for her winter home in Palm Beach. The nights I'd postponed projects to fly in for a simple dinner because she said she felt lonely. And now she was giving Sinclair the yacht? No, not just the yacht. Everything. It was personal. It wasn't about taxes or trust restructuring or legacy planning. It was a choice. She had chosen him. So I made a decision too. No more texts. No more polite smiles. No more pretending to be okay with being benched in the story of my own family. If she thought I was going to vanish quietly, she clearly forgot who she raised. 3 days passed. 3 long silent days. I didn't call her. I didn't text. I didn't drive past the house in Coral Gables to catch a glimpse of her new life. I did nothing. And that, I think, is what scared me most. how easy it was to go quiet. Because when you grow up with someone who controls every conversation, every emotion, every narrative, silence becomes power. I spent those days moving slowly, deliberately, like I was walking through a museum of my own life, studying every moment I had shared with my mother and wondering when the cracks started forming in the walls. The framed photo of us at my RSD graduation, her lipstick too bright, my eyes too hopeful. The silk scarf she gave me for my 30th birthday, still in its box. The voicemail from last fall where she said she was proud of me, and then immediately asked if I'd heard from Sinclair. Every memory had a shadow now. But instead of drowning in it, I started rearranging things. Literally. I redecorated my apartment. I moved the blue abstract painting from the hallway to the living room, where the light hit it better. I threw out a stack of old magazines she once gave me for inspiration. I boxed up the antique mirror she gifted me after Dad's funeral and slid it into storage. It was strange how good it felt. Like I was making space. Not just in my apartment but in my mind. By the end of day 3 I had clarity. Not anger. Not even sadness anymore. Just one sharpened truth. I had nothing to lose anymore. And that's when the idea came. It didn't hit me like lightning. It arrived like a whisper. A gentle nudge that built into a plan as I sat on my balcony, barefoot, legs crossed, watching the Miami skyline blink to life as the sun dipped into Biscayne Bay. I opened my laptop and searched 3 words. Yacht Brokerage Miami Confidential. Not because I wanted to sell the yacht. Because I wanted to understand what Sinclair had, what he'd stolen. The blue Maribel wasn't just a floating luxury item. It was a status symbol. A place where my parents had hosted fundraisers and dinners for senators. My father proposed to my mother on that boat. I had learned to swim off its side deck when I was 5. Every piece of mahogany, every chrome detail had been selected by my parents together. And now Sinclair used it for his sunset cocktails and Instagram reels. I clicked through listings, compared values, found the exact make and model. I even pulled up the insurance records from when my dad had it appraised in 2011, an old PDF still saved on my cloud drive. $3.6 million. And that was then. Well, with the upgrades I'd overseen 3 summers ago, the teak refinish, the glass helm station, the new Italian galley, it had to be worth well over 5. I sat back in my chair, fingers tented under my chin. Sinclair hadn't just taken a boat. He'd taken my story. And stories were the one thing I knew how to take back. As an art director, I understand narrative. I know how to shape perception, how to frame a message so it lands exactly where you want it. That's what branding is, after all. Emotional manipulation and elegant packaging. So what if I used that skill for something personal? What if I treated this like a campaign? Sinclair wanted the world to believe he was the charming gentleman who rescued a lonely widow from a cold, career-obsessed daughter. Fine. Let him keep thinking that. Let them all keep thinking that. Let them think I was licking my wounds, off somewhere wallowing in bitterness. Let them believe I was defeated. Because when people underestimate you, they don't see you coming. And I was coming. Not with lawyers. Not with tantrums. But with a plan that would make him regret ever stepping foot on my family's dock. I closed my laptop, and walked over to my closet. At the back, past the black gowns and sharp blazers, hung a white linen dress I hadn't worn since last summer. Lightweight. Flowy. Elegant. It made me look like I belonged on the deck of a yacht. Which, ironically, I once had. I ran my fingers down the fabric, smiling faintly. You took the boat, I whispered aloud. But you forgot I built the dock. I didn't go to Coral Gables. I didn't storm into my mother's house and demand answers. I didn't show up at the yacht and scream at Sinclair in front of his wine-sipping gallery crowd. Because this wasn't a movie. This was real life. And in real life, revenge is boring. Precise. Quiet. It starts in places like a dry cleaner's lobby, a yacht club foyer, or the softly lit corner of a cafe, where people don't expect explosions. They expect politeness. And that's where I decided to begin. The Coral Bay Marina was unusually quiet that Friday afternoon. Off-season lull. I timed it that way. Less eyes. Less questions. I wore the linen dress. Pulled my hair back into a sleek twist. Minimal makeup but flawless skin. No jewelry except a pair of delicate gold hoops that caught just enough sun. I looked approachable. Not desperate. Not angry. A woman with nothing to prove, and nowhere she needs to be. I parked my car 3 blocks away, walked in slowly as if I had every right to be there. Because I did. The blue Maribel was docked in its usual slip, rocking gently beside a smaller vessel named Sea Drift. I glanced at it only once. Just a flicker of the eye. No pause. Instead, I entered the yacht club's attached cafe, ordered an iced hibiscus tea, and settled at a corner table that offered a clean view of the docks. I waited. It wasn't about catching Sinclair in the act. There was no act. What I needed was information. Rhythm. Behavior. Routine. A plan isn't built on emotion. It's built on data. At exactly 4:37 p.m., a woman approached the blue Maribel carrying a beige leather tote and a clipboard. Slim, mid-50s, salt and pepper pixie cut, white polo with the club's crest embroidered on the sleeve. Crew, I guessed. Or management. She unlocked the yacht's side gate, stepped aboard with practiced ease, and disappeared inside for maybe 6 minutes. When she returned, she adjusted a fender, checked a mooring line, made a note on her clipboard and walked back toward the office. I stood up. Casually. Sipped the last of my tea. Tossed the cup. Crossed the gravel path between the cafe and marina office, just as she reached the door. "Excuse me," I said, soft and warm. "Hi. Sorry to bother you. I couldn't help but notice. Are you in charge of maintenance on the blue Maribel?" She looked up, a little surprised. Then smiled. Not fake. Not suspicious. Just tired. And curious. "Sometimes," she said. "Depends who's asking." I extended a hand. Win Mercer. The name hit. I saw it. Just a flicker. Recognition. Caution. "My family used to own it," I added quickly. "Just visiting." Nostalgia. She softened. "You must be Maribel's daughter." "I am." Pause. Then she nodded. "Beautiful vessel. Still in excellent shape." "She always was," I said. "My dad kept her spotless." "I remember." I tilted my head. "You've been here a while then." 17 years. "Perfect." "Well," I said, lowering my voice, "I won't keep you. Just seeing her today. It hit a little harder than I expected. I didn't even know Mom transferred ownership. I heard Sinclair's name and, yeah. I let that silence hang there like a velvet curtain. She looked at me again. Really looked. And for a moment I saw a flicker of something more than politeness. Empathy? Maybe. Or regret. "You know," she said, "you're not the first person to come by asking." I raised an eyebrow. She caught herself. "Nothing official. Just people in the community. Old friends. People who were surprised by how fast things changed." I didn't press. Didn't lean in like I was desperate for more. I just gave a slow, knowing smile. "I guess people move on fast when there's a yacht involved." She chuckled. "That they do." Before she turned to go, I asked, "Does he come around much?" "Sinclair. Only on weekends now. Usually late mornings. Sometimes brings guests. Always the same group, arts donors, political folks. You know the type." "I do," I said flatly. "And your mom?" "Haven't seen her in a while." Another pause. Then she leaned in, lowering her voice just a touch. "If you ever want to step aboard, I'm sure no one would stop you. The system still recognizes you on the access log." That caught me off guard. I didn't let it show. I just gave her a small, grateful nod. "Thanks. That means more than you know." She walked away. I watched her go, tucking every detail of that exchange into the folder in my mind labeled leverage. She wasn't a target. She was a crack in the wall. And every structure, no matter how glossy, falls the same way. From the inside. She showed up unannounced. Of course she did. It was early Sunday morning and I was standing barefoot in my kitchen, spreading fig jam on a piece of toast, still in my robe, when the knock came. 3 crisp raps, no doorbell. I knew it was her before I even looked. My mother never rings. She arrives. I opened the door slowly, and there she stood in a tailored ivory trench coat cinched at the waist, oversized sunglasses and glossy lips that didn't move even as she offered her usual greeting. "Darling." She said it like a punctuation mark. "Mom," I replied, stepping aside. She swept in like royalty, leaving the scent of white peonies and quiet judgment behind her. Her hair was pulled back in a perfect French twist, and she carried a taupe leather handbag that looked newer than the last time I saw her. Of course it did. The moment she stepped into my apartment, she scanned the room, eyes flitting over the artwork, the throw pillows, the stack of design books by the window. Inventory, not curiosity. I didn't expect visitors, I said, heading back to the kitchen. Would have made coffee. I don't need coffee. I just came to talk. I nodded. Fig jam. No thank you. I took a bite of my toast and watched her lower herself gracefully onto my ivory boucle couch, legs crossed at the ankle, hands folded neatly in her lap. So, I said, licking a bit of jam from my thumb. Let's talk. She removed her sunglasses slowly, revealing eyes that had once taught me how to look bored without blinking. I heard you were at the marina. Straight to the point. Of course. Sinclair probably texted her within minutes. I was. Why? I set my toast down, wiped my hands and leaned against the counter. You already know why. She exhaled. Not a sigh, more like a controlled release of air to show she was trying to be patient. Bronwyn, she said, and I hated how elegant my name sounded in her mouth. I thought we agreed. This is what's best. I don't recall agreeing, I said. She tilted her head. I explained everything. You didn't explain anything. You disappeared. You handed over the yacht, the trust, the house. You didn't call. You didn't warn me. You just flipped the switch. I didn't disappear, she said calmly. I've been living my life. You've been busy with yours. Pause. Then carefully, you didn't even come for my birthday. I sent you a gift. Jewelry. From a website. No note. I had meetings in LA. You always have meetings. Her voice wasn't raised. It never is. She doesn't shout. She just withdraws affection like oxygen. I crossed my arms. So that's what this is really about. You were hurt, so you rewrote your will and gave everything to a man you've known for 2 years. She smiled faintly. Don't be dramatic. You know very well this wasn't about spite. I didn't answer. Because we both knew it was exactly about spite. Her gaze wandered to the art on my wall. A minimalist piece I designed last year, just 2 lines intersecting in black and red ink. That's new. Yeah. Bleeding into each other, she murmured. Or slicing across. Depends who's looking, I said. We sat in silence for a moment, 2 women surrounded by expensive taste and shared history. Then she leaned forward slightly, voice lower. Sinclair is smart. He knows how to manage things I never could. He's helped me streamline my holdings, protect my assets. He understands estate structure in a way your father never did. Right? I said, eyes narrowing. Because this is all about tax efficiency. She gave me that cool, unreadable look I used to mistake for wisdom when I was younger. Now I saw it for what it was. Emotional cowardice with a silk lining. You've always been talented, she said softly. But you're not grounded. You live in colors, in ideas. You've never had the stomach for strategy. She stood. I stayed where I was. She smoothed the front of her coat, adjusted the strap of her purse, and added one final incision. I didn't choose Sinclair instead of you. I chose him because of you. Then she walked to the door. Hand on the knob, she paused. I hope you'll come to dinner next Sunday. We're hosting the board from the museum. I'd like to introduce them to the daughter I'm still proud of. My mouth was dry, but my voice came out clear. I'll think about it. She nodded once. And then she left. I didn't move for a full minute. Just stood in the echo of her perfume and her perfectly delivered cruelty. It wasn't rage I felt. It wasn't even sadness anymore. It was something purer. Cleaner. Focus. Sinclair was the weapon, my mother was the hand that pulled the trigger. And now I knew exactly what I was fighting for. Not the money. Not the yacht. Not even the inheritance. The narrative. Because she thought I'd fade into the background. But this time, I'd be the headline. The following Sunday I stood in front of my closet, staring at a dozen dresses that all suddenly felt too obvious. Too black. Too bold. Too much. I didn't need to look powerful. I needed to look new. I needed to walk into that house and make everyone ask the same question. Where has she been? Not, why is she here? Because there's a difference. The first one gives you the upper hand. The second puts you on the defensive. I chose a champagne-colored silk slip layered under a cream blazer. Understated. Elegant. Like I belonged at every gala I never got invited to. My hair pulled into a low knot. Minimal makeup, soft lips, no red. No drama. Just control. At 6:58 p.m., I pulled up to my mother's home in Coral Gables. There were already a dozen cars along the circle drive. 2 valets. 1 catering truck. Classical music drifting from somewhere inside. Something string-heavy, expensive, and forgettable. I stepped out of the car and felt the heat wrap around me like a second skin. Inside the house, nothing had changed. The same arched doorways. The same imported tile floors. The same oil painting of the bay at dusk above the fireplace. But everything felt different. Not because it looked new, but because now none of it was mine. And yet, I moved through the space like it still belonged to me. Because that was the plan. In the room. Without asking permission. I found my mother in the sunroom, laughing softly with a group of board members from the Perez Art Museum. She was wearing navy satin and a string of pearls I recognized as mine. A graduation gift from my father. Her smile froze just slightly when she saw me. Just enough to register. But only I would have noticed. "Darling," she said, gliding over, arms open for a kiss on the cheek. "I wasn't sure if you'd come." "Neither was I murmured, smiling back. But then I remembered how much I love museum donors. She gave a faint chuckle, just loud enough for the crowd to hear. Sinclair appeared at her side like an unwelcome shadow, holding 2 glasses of white wine. "Win," he said, offering one. "You look radiant." Radiant. Not beautiful. Not lovely. Radiant, like something untouchable and possibly dangerous. "Good. I'll stick to water tonight," I said, breezing past him. I greeted the guests like I belonged there. I knew some of them. They'd attended shows I curated, launches I branded, parties I was paid to make unforgettable. But most didn't recognize me. And that worked in my favor. Because mystery is magnetic. I watched from the periphery as my mother flitted from conversation to conversation like the conductor of a symphony she thought she'd composed alone. She never mentioned me once. Not to the donors. Not to the trustees. Not even to the journalist from Miami Modern scribbling notes about her cultural legacy. So I stepped in. Right at the moment when the room hit its peak volume and the clinking of glasses signaled dinner was soon. I slid beside the writer and offered a warm smile. "Are you covering tonight's event?" "I am," she said, glancing down at her notes. "Cultural legacy, estate philanthropy, that kind of thing." "Well," I said casually, "be sure to include the part about how the Mercer collection was originally curated by her daughter. My father might have funded the acquisitions, but the aesthetic vision came from me." The pen froze. Just for a second. "And you are?" "Win Mercer. Brand strategist. Art director. And until recently, heir to everything in this room." I let that land. Then I smiled and drifted away, not giving her the chance to ask follow-ups. Let her wonder. Let her dig. Because people don't quote what you explain. They quote what you imply. Dinner was served under the garden pergola strung with golden Edison bulbs. The table was long, the centerpieces abundant, the seating cards immaculately printed. I clocked the vendor immediately. Sinclair's touch. Classic, predictable, unimaginative. I took my seat between an aging tech investor and a sculptor who apparently had just discovered silence as a medium. I nodded politely. Laughed when required. And halfway through the second course I told a story. Just loud enough. About my time consulting for a gallery in Milan. How a collection almost lost its funding until I rewrote their brand narrative. How a single campaign gave them a 42% revenue increase. The sculptor nodded. The investor blinked. My mother looked like she'd bitten a lemon. Perfect. By dessert the room was buzzing. And I knew I'd done it. No rage. No confrontation. Just presence. Reclaimed, rebranded, reintroduced. I was no longer the daughter who vanished. I was the woman who chose to return. And that's the difference between revenge and control. Revenge wants to hurt. Control wants to last. It started with a whisper. A casual suggestion, dropped into a conversation at the end of that very same dinner. I was standing near the garden's edge with a woman named Lucille, a gallery liaison from Sarasota, new to the Miami scene, eager to be seen and accepted. She wore too much perfume and not enough discernment. "I've always wanted to see the blue Maribel," she said dreamily. "They say it's one of the last truly original restorations from the pre-2010 fleet. Maribel's design must be exquisite." I sipped my water and tilted my head just slightly. "She didn't design it." Lucille blinked. "I did." Oh, she said, her tone shifting from warm to uncertain. I didn't know you were involved. I wasn't. I was it. The concept, the materials, the interiors. I designed every inch of that boat while my mother was still deciding between blush and bone-white napkins for her fundraiser. But it's fine, I added lightly, credit's a flexible thing in this family. Lucille laughed, the awkward laugh of someone who senses danger but doesn't know where it's coming from. And then I struck, gently. Actually, I said, we're planning a small evening cruise next weekend. A thank you sail for a few of the museum's major patrons. You should come. It'd be a great way to see the yacht as it was meant to be experienced. Her eyes lit up. Oh, that sounds divine. Will Maribel be hosting? I smiled. No. I will. I didn't ask for permission. I called the marina. Spoke with Elaine, the woman from before. Told her I'd be onboarding a few guests for a short evening sail. Quiet. Professional. Family boat. She didn't even blink. You're still in the system, she said. If you're using the secondary access key, I can have it prepped for launch by Saturday afternoon. Perfect, I replied. I'll bring the wine. Saturday arrived with clear skies and just the right amount of drama in the air. Windy but warm. High clouds streaking across the horizon like a set design. I arrived at the marina early. Too early. I needed time to walk the deck alone. The blue Maribel was spotless, of course. Sinclair kept up appearances even if he lacked taste. But the soul of the vessel was unchanged. I could still feel it. My father's precision. My hand in every line of the upholstery. The way the light hit the marble wet bar at exactly the right angle just before sunset. This wasn't his boat. And it never would be. As the guests arrived, Lucille among them along with 2 trustees from the museum and an up-and-coming collector from Wynwood, I played the perfect host. Smiling. Welcoming. Effortlessly composed. They sipped rose and posed for photos against the railing as we pulled away from the dock, the skyline gleaming behind us like a postcard. Sinclair didn't know about it. Yet. That was the point. I wasn't hiding. I was documenting. Every clink of glass, every Instagram story, every laugh caught in the wind, it all served a single purpose. Visibility. You can't erase someone who everyone is watching. I gave a toast as we passed under the Rickenbacker Causeway. To legacy, I said, raising my glass. The kind you design yourself. Polite chuckles. Applause. One woman muttered brilliant under her breath. And just as the yacht curved back toward the marina, I made sure someone was filming when I said it loud enough for the camera to catch. My mother may hold the title, but this boat still remembers who built it. That clip would get shared. Reposted. Screen recorded. Because words whispered in halls are powerful. But words filmed on yachts? They're immortal. By the time we docked, the sun had dipped below the skyline and the city was glowing behind us like a cathedral of glass. I stepped off the yacht last, heels clicking against the polished deck, wind pulling at the hem of my silk dress. A woman. Unbothered. A woman in control. And somewhere I knew Sinclair was pouring himself a scotch and reading the first text from someone saying, "Did you know Wynn took the boat out? Good. Let the cracks begin. Because control isn't seized in one loud moment. It's taken inch by inch. And this was just the first wave. He waited 2 days. I almost respected the restraint. Tuesday morning, 9:02 a.m. A text from an unknown number. Wynn. Let's talk. Blue bottle noon. No bluster. No accusation. Just let's talk, as if I were a difficult employee, not the woman he tried to erase. I considered ignoring it. But silence in this case might have looked like guilt. Or worse, fear. So I showed up. Early. Blue bottle was tucked on a quiet corner in the design district. Glass walls, navy tile, small batch roasts, and just enough pretension to feel curated. He was there when I arrived, seated outside beneath a black umbrella, one leg crossed over the other, espresso untouched. His blazer was off. Shirt pressed. Sunglasses tucked neatly on the table beside his phone. He stood when he saw me. Wynn, he said warmly, as if I were his niece home from college. You look stunning. I slid into the chair across from him and removed my sunglasses. I know. That pause, half a beat too long, told me I'd struck first. He smiled. Too tight. I trust the sale went well. You tell me, I said. You've probably seen every photo by now. Another pause. He leaned back, laced his fingers. I'll admit, it surprised me. That's the thing about legacy, I said, sipping my coffee. It remembers who earned it. He tilted his head. You're not here to make this a war, are you? I'm not the one who brought guns. A flicker in his eyes. Brief but there. I've always admired your intelligence, he said smoothly. But this performative retaliation, it isn't you. You were always more refined. You're confusing me with the version of me you preferred. His smile didn't move, but the corner of his jaw tensed, just slightly. So what's your plan? He asked. Sabotage? A smear campaign? Gossip and whispers until people ask questions that can't be answered. I leaned forward. I don't need to whisper, Sinclair. I just need to exist where you didn't expect me. He exhaled sharply through his nose. This is about the yacht, then? No, I said calmly. This is about narrative. You took mine. I'm taking it back. He picked up his espresso and swirled it once before setting it back down. Untouched. You know, he said slowly, your mother made her decisions because she felt you had drifted. That you'd built a life that didn't include her. I built a life she didn't control, I corrected. He tapped his fingers once on the table. She loves you. That hasn't changed. I tilted my head. You don't get to invoke her love like a receipt. His eyes locked onto mine. And in that second I saw it, the smallest crack in his polished facade. Not fear. Not anger. Just the creeping realization that I wasn't playing to win anymore. I was playing to outlast. He reached for his sunglasses. This doesn't have to escalate. Oh, Sinclair, I said with a soft smile. It already has. I stood. Tossed a $10 bill on the table. Even though I hadn't ordered anything. You know, I added as I turned to leave, next time you want to erase someone, make sure they don't know how to write better than you. It arrived on Wednesday. No text. No email. No call. Just a letter. On thick cream stationery, folded once, placed in a slate gray envelope sealed with real wax, of course. My mother never liked digital things. Technology is for convenience, she used to say. But legacy is handwritten. I found it on my doorstep when I returned from a gallery walkthrough. No return address. No name on the outside. But I recognized the seal. A small M pressed into the wax, surrounded by a wreath of ivy. The Mercer monogram. I stood in the hallway for a full minute before opening it. Not because I was afraid. Because I already knew, whatever was inside wouldn't shout. It would slice. I hope this note finds you centered. I saw photos from the yacht outing. You looked lovely as always. I'm sure the guests enjoyed your sense of curation. I do want to be clear. I see what you're doing. The appearances. The narrative. The public performance of private unrest. It's very a kind of quiet rebellion wrapped in elegance. I can't say I didn't expect it. But I'll ask you once, please stop. This family has survived decades of scrutiny, of press, of quiet scandal. We do not dissolve from within. You and I both know how fragile reputation is, not just mine. Yours too. There are things people remember even when they pretend to forget. If you need money, ask. If you need recognition, we can find ways to acknowledge your role. But if what you want is chaos, I won't protect you from its consequences. Not this time. With love, Mother. I read it 3 times. Not because I didn't understand it. Because I did. This wasn't a warning. It was a veiled promise. Not to protect me. Not to support me. But to bury me quietly if I kept making noise. The part that struck me most wasn't the threat. It was the offer. If you need recognition, we can find ways to acknowledge your role. As if acknowledgement was a favor. As if being written back into my own story could be negotiated, gently inserted like a cameo in someone else's spotlight. As if I should say thank you. I folded the letter once, precisely. Slid it back into the envelope. Placed it on the kitchen counter next to a bottle of bourbon I kept for clients. Untouched since my last pitch meeting. And I stood there. Not shaking. Not crying. Just burning. Because that was the moment I understood. My mother wasn't manipulated. She didn't fall under Sinclair's spell. She didn't get taken advantage of. She wasn't naive. She was an architect. She handed him the tools, the access, the trust. Because I didn't need her anymore. And nothing threatens someone like a daughter who no longer wants to be her mother's reflection. She wasn't afraid of what I was doing. She was afraid of who I was becoming. Visible. Unapologetic. Louder than her. I picked up the letter, opened the trash, and lit a match. I didn't sleep the night after the letter burned. Not because I was afraid. Because my mind wouldn't stop building. If she wanted me quiet, I'd speak louder. If she wanted me to fade, I'd make myself permanent. Not through scandal. Not through gossip. Through presence. I didn't want to destroy what she built. I wanted to build something better. Something with my name on the door and my fingerprints on the walls. And I knew exactly where to start. The next morning I texted Delaney. Yes. My mother's estate attorney. I still had his number. And he still owed me one. I'm not contesting anything. I'm creating something new. Call me. 20 minutes later I had an appointment. By noon I was seated across from him in the same conference room where, weeks ago, he slid my mother's betrayal across the table in a cream folder. This time the folder was mine. Art Foundation? He said, raising an eyebrow. You're serious? I'm done asking for legacy, I said. I'm going to create it. He leaned back, folding his hands. And the funding? I've already sold 2 pieces. Private collectors. I'll cash flow the startup. I'm not asking for Mercer money. This will be Win Mercer projects. No ties. No apologies. He tapped a pen against his notepad. You understand how this will be perceived. I smiled. I'm counting on it. The next 48 hours were a blur. Emails. Phone calls. Gallery contacts I hadn't reached out to in years. My former creative director in LA offered to consult. A venue owner in Wynwood said she'd comp the first 3 months for a studio space. A museum intern I'd mentored messaged me, if you're building something, I want in. Momentum is a strange thing. Once it tips, it doesn't care who tried to stop it. By Saturday I had a proposal. A logo. A site in development. A 3-page manifesto that said everything my mother's letter didn't. Art is power. Voice is legacy. Control is earned. I announced it Sunday morning. No press release. No dramatic post. Just a quiet upload to my personal site and one line on my Instagram story. Introducing W. Mercer Projects, an independent foundation for bold voices, brave spaces, and stories no one else would greenlight. Within hours it was reshared 100 times. Not thousands. Not viral. But targeted. The people who needed to see it saw it. Artists. Donors. Curators. The press assistant at the museum board. The old money families who pretended not to watch me while watching everything I did. I didn't mention my mother. I didn't have to. The absence of her name said more than any confrontation ever could. This wasn't an act of rebellion. This was infrastructure. Because if she owned the rooms, I'd build my own house. And if she erased my name from the registry, I'd write it in stone at the door. It started with an email. Subject line, coffee? The sender, Edward Leland, vice chair of the museum board. Old money, old manners, and the kind of man who never wastes a message on someone without influence. I stared at it for a moment, then opened it. When I've followed your work for years quietly. Your new foundation is intriguing. I'd love to learn more. Are you free this week for coffee? Wednesday or Friday, South Point Club? Let me know what works. Respectfully, Edward. Just like that. No drama. No backstory. Just a door. Unlocked. I chose Wednesday. The South Point Club was exactly what you'd expect. Polished wood paneling, velvet chairs, and a wait staff trained in the art of invisibility. I arrived early. Edward was already there. He stood as I approached, offering his hand like a diplomat welcoming an equal. Win, he said warmly. You look radiant. I'm tired, I said. But I appreciate the illusion. He smiled, gestured for me to sit. I won't take up much of your time, he said. I just wanted to tell you face to face that what you're doing matters. I raised an eyebrow. He continued. I've been on the board a long time. Long enough to know when something's changing. Your mother is a powerful woman. No one doubts that. But she's been curating legacy the same way she curated dinner parties. Selective. Controlled. Beautiful but closed. And I'm the mess that ruins the tablecloth? I asked lightly. He chuckled. You're the reason people lean in. Then he lowered his voice. There's a donor, one of ours. Quiet, significant. He's interested in shifting his support. Says he's tired of funding old names for the sake of tradition. Says your foundation feels honest, urgent, alive. I stayed still. Does my mother know? I asked. Edward smiled faintly. Not yet. But she'll feel it soon. We sat in silence for a few beats. The kind of silence that isn't uncomfortable, just inevitable. He leaned in slightly. You've started something. Whether you meant to or not. I meant to, I said softly. His eyes sparkled. I hope you keep going. When I got home I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I didn't tell anyone. Because this wasn't a win. This was confirmation. A small private shift in gravity. One board member. One donor. One quiet conversation. And suddenly the empire my mother built wasn't untouchable. Because she'd spent years perfecting the painting on the wall. And I had just cracked the frame. The message came from Calla Beaumont. Sinclair's daughter. I hadn't heard her name in years. We'd only met once, briefly at a fundraiser 2 summers ago. She was polite, poised, forgettable. The kind of girl who disappeared into a room instead of owning it. So when her DM showed up I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. Hi Win, I know this is unexpected. I'd really appreciate the chance to talk. Privately. No drama. Just a conversation. My number's below if you're willing. No pressure. It didn't feel fake. It didn't feel like bait. Felt nervous. I waited 2 hours to reply. Tomorrow. 11 a.m. La Segunda. Don't bring anyone. She was already there when I arrived. Seated at the back of the cafe in an oversized sweater and dark sunglasses. Sipping tea like she was trying to disappear into the ceramic cup. She stood when I reached the table, offered a small smile. Win. Thanks for coming. Curiosity wins, I said sitting down. What's this about? She hesitated. Then leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. I know what my father's done. I said nothing. I know about the yacht. The estate documents. The manipulation. I know more than he thinks I do. And I'm not okay with it. So I said nothing. Because I wanted to see how far she'd go. I'm not here to defend him, she said quickly. But I also know my father doesn't move without leverage. He's smart, sure, but careful. He doesn't take over someone's legacy unless he's certain the person handing it to him wants it gone. That hit harder than I expected. Calla stirred her tea. I saw your mother give him access to everything. Passwords. Accounts. She said, and I quote, Win doesn't want to be involved. She prefers distance. Sinclair can keep things running. She said that, I murmured. Calla nodded. Like it was a favor. Like she was protecting you from responsibility. But the way she said it didn't feel generous. It felt like strategy. I sat back in my chair. Calla watched me unsure. Then she reached into her bag and slid a folded paper across the table. I shouldn't be showing you this. It's from my father's private file. But you should know. The foundation he's launching next quarter? The one he says is in your mother's name? You're not mentioned anywhere. Not in the materials. Not even in the family bio section. I unfolded the page. Mock-ups. Brand deck. A new name. The Beaumont Mercer Institute. My mother's portrait, aged up to look like a patron saint of art. Sinclair's bio. Founder, legacy consultant, estate strategist. And at the bottom in fine print. Board currently in formation. Names pending. No mention of me. Not even once. Not as a designer. Not as a daughter. Not as anything. I folded the paper, slid it into my bag and met Calla's eyes. Why are you showing me this? She looked down at her hands. Because I don't want to be my father. And because I think you're the only person who might actually be able to stop him. Pause. And her. That hung in the air longer than either of us expected. I can feed you information, Calla said softly. Not lies. Just the truth. Quietly. No strings. You don't owe me anything. I just want someone in the room who sees it. I nodded. Once. Then stood. Calla. She looked up. You've just joined the wrong war, I said. But maybe the right side. I gave it 3 days. Not out of hesitation. Out of calculation. The moment I saw the mock-up for the Beaumont Mercer Institute, I knew exactly what Sinclair and my mother were building. It wasn't a legacy project. It was a monument. A stone-cold rewrite of our family history, where Sinclair played the visionary and my mother became the patron saint of cultural refinement. Where I didn't exist. Where I was never even necessary. They weren't trying to erase me out of rage. They were doing it so thoroughly it looked like I was never there to begin with. And I was done letting them get away with it. So I set my next move in motion. I called Jacqueline, my old friend from RSD, now creative director at Frey, one of the fastest-growing editorial platforms covering culture, power, and design. She picked up on the second ring. "Win Mercer," she said, drawing out the syllables. "I was wondering when you'd make some noise." "I have a story," I said simply. "And I'm ready to tell it. I'm listening." I laid it out piece by piece, not whining, not accusing. Just facts. Dates. Screenshots. Emails. The narrative I had curated since the moment I realized what my mother was trying to erase. When I finished, Jacqueline was quiet for a long beat. Then she said, "You're not asking for sympathy. No. You're asking for truth. I'm asking for the space to tell it." She exhaled. "You've got it." 2 days later, the interview happened in my studio. Cameras. Light. Quiet staging. Not a sob story setup. This wasn't a takedown. It was articulation. We filmed in one take. I spoke plainly. About the yacht. The estate. The design work I had done. The legacy I had contributed to. The trust that was transferred. The name that was removed. And then I said, they built a structure on top of my silence. So I decided to speak. I didn't name Sinclair. I didn't trash my mother. I didn't have to. Because the audience they cared about most, the art world, the donors, the ones who read between the lines, would know exactly who I was talking about. That was the beauty of it. I didn't need revenge. I just needed the truth, published with enough elegance that even the people who preferred lies would be forced to look at it. The story dropped the following Monday. Front page of Frey's culture section. Win Mercer. Legacy, loss, and the art of taking up space. By noon, it had been shared by 4 major galleries, 2 influencers, and an architect in Lisbon I'd met once at a panel who DM'd me. "She made a house. You built a movement." By 3, I got a text from an unknown number. "You're making a mess. Sup, this?" I didn't reply. At 5, Calla sent me one line. "They've postponed the Institute's launch." And I smiled. Not because I'd won. Because they finally understood. This wasn't just about the yacht. This was about the narrative. And I wasn't letting go of the mic. It arrived on heavy cardstock. Black envelope. Gold foil. Sealed with the family crest. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. But I did anyway, slowly, deliberately. Inside was an invitation to the Beaumont Mercer Institute Gala. Yes. The same event they had postponed after my interview went live. Apparently they decided to rebrand, not cancel. They changed the name slightly, the Mercer Legacy Evening. Less about Sinclair now. More about family. But the meaning was the same. A glossy resurrection. And beneath the event title, printed in italics. Featuring a special moment of unity and reflection between generations. Unity. Reflection. They weren't hiding it. They were trying to pull me into a photo op. One perfect shot of mother and daughter smiling in evening gowns, crystal glasses in hand, a curated caption about forgiveness. And just like that, their scandal becomes a story of reconciliation. They wanted to turn my truth into PR. I closed the card. And I smiled. Because if they were asking me to step into the light, they'd better be prepared for how brightly I'd shine. That night, I sat on my balcony, legs curled under me, a glass of bourbon in hand, and drafted the beginning of what would be the final move. This wasn't going to be a confrontation. This would be a presentation. And I wasn't just attending the gala. I was going to own it. Bring my team. My name. My story. And thanks to Calla's steady stream of quiet updates, I already knew the layout, the timing of speeches, the donors attending, and, most importantly, the visual timeline Sinclair was preparing for the evening. A highlight reel. Photos. Quotes. Archival footage. The final slide. An image of my mother beneath the words, "Legacy is what we leave in our children." I almost laughed when I saw it. Because they still thought this story was theirs to control. They still believed I could be included back into the narrative. Like a decoration. What they didn't know was, I wasn't showing up to smile. I was showing up to rewrite the ending. The gala was held at the Old Shore Estate, one of those palm-lined mansions designed to feel like a museum. White stone columns, glass chandeliers, and enough marble to make Rome weep. The valet took my keys. My heels clicked against the limestone steps. And as I walked up toward the gold-lit doors, I wasn't nervous. I was ready. Because I wasn't there to perform. I was there to reclaim. Inside, the room was immaculate. A string quartet near the staircase. Waiters in black suits. Guests in gowns and cufflinks. At the center, my mother. Wearing silver silk and an expression that had been practiced in the mirror. Warm but withholding. Calculated. Familiar. Next to her, Sinclair, hands clasped behind his back, nodding graciously at donors as if he were the one who'd built the house. And when they saw me, both of them, their smiles didn't falter. But their posture changed. Slightly. Precisely. As if to say, stay in line. Stay on script. I smiled back. And said nothing. The evening played out like a stage production. Toasts. Applause. An art auction. And then the lights dimmed. Time for the final presentation. The screen lit up behind the podium. A montage began, black and white photos of my mother as a child, soft piano underlining her narration. Then her wedding photo. My father. Their first fundraiser. The early days of her cultural empire. The voiceover shifted to Sinclair's voice. Leggy. Philanthropy. Vision. The final moments were clear. A slow pan across the Mercer family tree, with one name conspicuously missing from the graphic. And then the image Calla had warned me about appeared. My mother on the blue Maribel, smiling into the horizon. The screen faded to white. The words appeared. Legacy is what we leave in our children. The applause started before the lights even came up. But I didn't clap. I stepped forward. Before anyone could introduce the next speaker, I crossed the floor and ascended the small platform. No one stopped me. No one could. Because I walked like someone who belonged there, and more importantly, like someone who built the damn room. I turned to the crowd, cleared my throat, smiled, and said, "That was beautiful. Really. I especially loved the part where I didn't exist." A few polite laughs. A few confused glances. I continued. "For those of you who don't know me, I'm Wynne Mercer, daughter of Maribel Mercer, former designer of the Blue Maribel, co-architect of the collection you just spent 45 minutes applauding." Silence now. Not hostile. Just still. I glanced at my mother. She didn't blink. But I saw her throat tighten. I turned back to the crowd. I was asked here tonight as a symbol of unity. Family. Closure. But unity that requires erasure is not unity. It's control. So let me be clear. I'm not here to be folded back into someone else's legacy. I'm here to declare my own. From the wings, one of my team members stepped out and handed me something. A sleek black folder. I held it up. This is the official launch of Wynne Mercer Projects. A foundation for real independent voices in the arts. We've secured 3 grants, 6 artists, and we're not waiting for approval. We're already in motion. Legacy isn't what you leave behind when you die. It's what you stand for while you're still here. Then I smiled. Warm. Steady. Untouchable. And I'm just getting started. I stepped off the stage to silence. But it didn't stay silent for long. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then stronger. Louder. Because no one roots for a dynasty. They root for a revolution. Later, as the guests thinned and the champagne wore off, I stood on the balcony overlooking the water. The moon reflected across the bay like silver glass. My mother appeared beside me. No words for a long while. Then, "You humiliated us." I didn't turn to her. No. I told the truth. She was quiet again. Then, "You've made yourself very visible." I looked at her now. Steady. Good. Visibility invites consequences. So does silence. She looked at me like she almost didn't recognize me anymore. And maybe finally she didn't. She stepped back inside. And I stayed there. Alone. Unbothered. A breeze caught the hem of my dress. I closed my eyes. And smiled. Because this time, the story belonged to me.